my pleasure to introduce Peter Folan. Peter hails from Belmont, Massachusetts. He then went to BC for his undergrad. He was on the wrestling team here. Then he did a master's in education from BC, and then went back to teach at his high school at Belmont Hill. And then he returned to Boston College, where he works at FYE. He completed his doctorate from the University of Pennsylvania last year, graduated last year, I believe, and is the proud father of Tommy and Caroline. So, there he is.
Well, thank you guys for coming. I'm excited to be here. It's also nice to see so many friendly faces in the crowd. It's weird to host a lot of retreats where you don't have to really give a talk. So I have a lot of appreciation for those that have gone before me. People say you can't really go home. It's been my experience that that's not the case. I went home this summer, literally. We bought the house that I grew up in for my father, my wife Carolyn, my 6-year-old son Tommy, and my 3-year-old daughter Caroline and I. We all moved home. Moving home is a deeply emotional and was a deeply spiritual experience for us. And it forced me to ponder a lot about my life, and actually forced me to think about a lot of the conversations and the questions that I debate with you guys in first-year experience. Can I really go home? What happens if I go home and it's changed? Will the new me fit into my old life? How do I form connections back with my old friends? How do I talk with my parents? What if my home has changed? What if my family's moved? Do I like who I've been? Do I like who I'm becoming? So a lot of these questions have really gone through my mind as I got settled in the house and moved in. And what I've come to realize is that you can really come home. But in order to do that, we have to accept who we are. We have to accept where we've been, and we got to accept where we're going. I think that reconciliation requires that we take that childhood perspective that we have and reconcile that with that adult view that we're living in. I think that's key. So how did I do that? How did I make peace with coming home? Well, I did that really through this notion of heroic literature and the journey of the hero. You may think that's a little crazy, right? I am. I've always been a reader. My whole life I've loved reading. For me, reading started though, and I really sort of sharpened my teeth on comic books, right? Captain America, Spider-Man, Batman. These are how I defined myself. This is how I really took pride in myself. I never thought a challenge was too big, nothing I couldn't do, no mountain I couldn't climb. I always thought I could outwork someone, get up earlier, stay up later, right? I could lift more, I could run more, I could study harder. I felt like there was nothing I couldn't accomplish. That was really rooted in what I read. So as I got older, my heroes changed just a little bit though. It went to Odysseus, to Hector, right? To Randall McMurphy, to Esperanza, to Atticus Finch. So as I read more, my heroes changed. And the way I saw life changed. But really, for me, being a man connected into this idea of self-reliance, right? And that's really how I defined myself for so much of my high school and college experience. And that came from me thinking about these characters as I read at night. I was always reading. The irony is last night as I was putting my son to bed, I found Tommy in his bed last night at 8:30. He was supposed to be in bed at 7:30 with a flashlight and comic book in his hand. I mean, I loved it, right? But that's how I did it. I would walk with these characters in my mind and I would imagine myself with them. But it was the emotions that they felt on their journey that I was struck by. So it shouldn't be any surprise that I taught high school English for over 10 years. Or that I was fascinated with this guy Joseph Campbell and his notion of the hero's journey. Right? I had fed my appetite so much as a child on heroic literature. My favorite, or one of my favorites, was The Hobbit. Right? The unexpected journey there and back again. How can we not love The Hobbit? Here's a guy who's a little vertically challenged, right? Pleasantly plump, hairy feet. We have a lot in common, right? It's a sign of strength. He gets a knock on his door. He's pulled out into an adventure. No time to prepare, no time to pack, no time to think, just to go. And it's not about slaying the dragon or climbing the mountains for me. It was that inner struggle that Bilbo faced. Overcoming his fears, overcoming his anxieties. That's what I was always drawn to. And I think we all can be drawn to epic literature in that same fashion, right? Because we're all on that same journey. And we're looking for acceptance, we're looking for companionship, we're looking for love, and we're really looking for that sense of homecoming at the end of our journey. That's what we love. Because it's been my experience that it's from the hero in that return home that they find perspective on their lives, their family, and how they fit into the world. So it was really through literature that I think I was able to return home. And why is that so important? Well, I think each of us is going on a hero's journey every day, right? A little mini one. Think about it. You wake up in the morning, hopefully you shower, you get dressed, you head out that door. You go through a series of tests and trials. You encounter conversations, right? Your ideas are challenged. Maybe you go through some deep physical struggles. And you return home at the end of that night and you're fundamentally different. You've changed. Many of you just returned home for Thanksgiving or Christmas. So you've had that actual physical perspective change. You've had to enter into that own world, or you're going back home. It's really hard to integrate that BC life with the life at home. How does one do that? How do we reconcile that? How do we find acceptance in both worlds? I think that's critical. To do that, if I look to literature, it requires that we transcend the finitude of our existence. And from that, we can look to make peace with that external world, but more importantly, that internal world. We have to find a sense of atonement, right? We have to become at one or in harmony with ourselves. And that's that reconciliation I think we're all looking for in our homecoming. And that's how we really can deal with this inner struggle. And that's what I've been doing. That's what I've been searching for. I'm not that different from you guys, right? In high school, I got good grades. I played 3 varsity sports. Didn't really get in trouble. I did what was asked of me. Okay? I grew up 30 minutes away from here. I went to a very demanding all-boys school, and I loved it. I also went to Mass every Sunday. Wore a shirt and tie. We went to the 10:30 Mass, and we sat as a family. That was just part of what we did growing up. Actually, it was more than that. My grandfather actually sang in local churches. He sang all around metropolitan Boston. So I grew up actually in the choir lofts as a kid, up where the organ is. And I sat up there for many times, sort of being babysat by my grandfather. So I spent a lot of time in church. But for me, my faith was so connected to the actual service itself that I didn't know how to make sense of it outside of that. But going to Mass every Sunday as a kid actually provided me a well of strength, especially when my mother died, which is another story and another talk for a different time. But that well of strength was always there, and I actually tapped into it many times. So here I am, that good kid, coming to college, and I wanted that college lifestyle. I had done everything everyone ever asked from me. I wanted to break away. I wanted to put my family, my high school life in the rear view and come to BC. I wanted to be that college guy, right? And I was. I had an experience so similar to yours, right? But I wasn't really nervous. I always thought I had this internal compass that was going to point me in the right direction no matter what, and I was steering the ship. But what I realized is when I got here, I was almost like a sailboat without a centerboard. As much as I turned that rudder, right, I was drifting. I was drifting into places in ways that I really didn't want to be. I felt like there were different sides of my personality that were competing. Here I was, this big athlete. I was starting in the wrestling team, taking my English classes that I loved. I loved writing papers. But I was also drinking a lot, right? And I was making that Friday and Saturday night more important than anything else in my life. And I realized that I felt invincible. There was a void, though. God wasn't really part of my life in any capacity whatsoever. I wasn't going to Mass. That was diminishing. My phone calls home were also stopping. I felt like I had everything under control. Hangovers and steak and cheese replaced, for me, family dinners and Sunday Mass. That's what my weekend life was like. It was about hanging out, it was friends, it was partying. I was focused so much on these little questions about what we were doing and where that we were going that I forgot about the big ones. That all changed my junior year. It was a Sunday morning, I got a knock on the door. I was living off campus. Rolled out of bed, grabbed a t-shirt off the pool table I left there the night before, stepped around cases of empty beers and opened the door. It was the BCPD. Now, this was not my first rodeo with the Boston College Police Department by this point in my life. But there was something odd about this, right? Why would they be there at 8 in the morning on a Sunday morning? They were looking for me. And it wasn't about the party that we had the night before. My father had had a heart attack. This is before cell phones. Police department came to find me. I had to get to the hospital. I was lost in that moment, right? I wasn't sure what to go. I had no direction. I just knew I had to get to that hospital. I got there. My dad was already in the middle of a quadruple bypass surgery. I'm a junior in college. Wandering around the hospital, I found my way to the chapel. I got down on my knees and said a prayer. That had been the first time in a while that I had opened up a direct line of communication with God. And that scared me. It scared me because I realized in that second that my relationship and my faith was directly tied to wants and needs. What I wanted and what I needed. That was a big moment for me. Shouldn't there have been more? So thankfully the surgery went well. My dad was in the hospital for a while. He recovered. We watched the BC Virginia Tech game that following Thursday night. We had some ice cream. BC won, thank God. Right? And it was good. But I felt like I owed God something. I felt like I owed my father something. I felt like I owed myself something in that moment, right? There had to be more. I could be more. I could do more. Seeing my father in the recovery room made me think about my home, what I had learned in my home, and it brought some really important memories back. It made me think about playing pirates with my dad on the beach as a little kid, right? I was Jim from Treasure Island, and we'd play these games. It made me remember how when I was playing varsity football, my dad would stand the furthest away on the sidelines, away from all the crazy parents. I remember no matter where my wrestling match was, Wilkesboro, Pennsylvania, East Orange, New Jersey, Bangor, Maine, my dad would get in the car and drive there no matter what to watch me wrestle. I recalled how important it was that he said I learned to write and that I knew our family history. How important it was that I had morals, that I had integrity. I also realized in that moment, too, that it was from my father that I learned the importance of believing in God. I also recalled as I kneeled in that chapel at the hospital, I had this flashback to seeing my father kneel and pray in church on Sunday morning. And I took great strength from that. And I also, it's funny, I remembered this moment too that I loved even more, of how I always would sneak in Han Solo to Mass with me, like the little action figure, and play with him in the missile until I got caught. If my mother caught me, she would pinch me. If my dad caught me, he would smile and wink. And I realized in that moment that God actually was with me all the time, not just when I needed things, that he was walking with me all the time. And that forced me to think about who I wanted to be. Now, I wish that I could say that I was able to integrate that knowledge directly into my life as a junior in college. I'd be lying to you if I said I didn't. But I realized something. I realized God was there more often than just in that moment of crisis. But I didn't really integrate that understanding of how God fit into my life till the age of 31. But the thing is, I can remember the exact moment. It was Christmas Eve. It's actually the moment my son was born. I found home in fatherhood. When I held that baby in my arms, it was a miracle. 10 fingers, 10 toes. And I realized right there the gift of fatherhood and God's love. My world changed forever. Now, I love my parents, right? I love my sister. I love my wife. But when Tommy was born, and a few years later, Caroline, my heart doubled in size in each of those moments. I have never loved two individuals so unconditionally as I do them. And it was that connection that I realized that God had that same love for me. It gave me the courage to acceptance and be accepted by God and to deepen my faith. Part of what I love about my life now is that I've come full circle, right? That it was totally weird to move back into the home that I grew up in. Now I take great strength in it, and I take great pride in it. I do still see the world some ways as myself as a father and a husband, or as that son and a brother. But I've learned to integrate both of those. And the way I've done that is I look for these great moments of grace in my life, moments of God. I see it every day. When I see my daughter Caroline carrying the cat around the house as if it were a stuffed animal, and I see that twinkle in her eye, I know that's God's love. And I can feel God's abiding presence as I hold my son's hand and I walk him to kindergarten in the morning. That's what I love. My view on life has changed. I'm still a reader, but now I mostly am reading out loud. I'm reading Curious George, Angelina Ballerina, and Nate the Great. I no longer look to be defined by these great heroic deeds. I take pride in being extraordinarily ordinary. Waking up in the morning, making coffee, buttering toast, hanging up Christmas lights, tying shoes, getting kids dressed, coaching soccer. These are the things that I love, and these are who I am. They're one and the same. So as you head home for Christmas, understand that you're going to feel out of sorts, and that's okay. It's been my experience that in order to integrate our lives, we got to learn to straddle them before we can integrate. The disequilibrium that you feel, it's not a crisis. It's a form of intimacy, a way to get to know yourself and a way to find God. That intimacy also allows you to recognize how much you've grown. Because when that hero returns home, they have to see the world differently. And they often see their world differently. And the reason they're doing that is because he or she has grown in profound ways. So recognize that. Home is what you make of it. Home is where you can be yourself. It took me a great while to feel comfortable in myself. I had a journey many miles, but I recognize now I had a companion with me the whole time. I wish I had known that sooner. I realized that for accepting and embracing God's love and him as my companion, I began to feel comfortable in myself. So I hope each of you heads home for the holidays, that you renew yourself, that you renew your faith, and that you look to the heroes in your life for inspiration, hope, and joy. Thank you.